Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Around the Lens, recorded November 16th, 2015. I'm your host, David J. Murphy. I'm a photojournalist with about 16 years experience, currently working in Charleston, South Carolina. My co-host is Zach Roberts, and our guest tonight is Marcus DiPaola. I hope I said that right. And why don't you guys go ahead and let the audience know about your experience. Zach, we'll start with you.
Zach Roberts. I'm a photojournalist. I've been working for about 10 years professionally. I've freelanced for everyone from The Guardian to Al Jazeera to any numbers of tiny websites across the country. You can find my work at zdroberts.com.
And I'm Marcus. I'm a photojournalist, and now I'm also a TV reporter as well, based in Chicago. I've been in news for about 5 years, and I generally cover natural disasters, so hurricanes, wildfires, tornadoes, earthquakes, and disease outbreaks like Ebola.
Oh, fun. Were you in
Liberia? Yeah, I was in Liberia for about 10 days. I got to cover that. It was very sad, but also, you know, if you know Africans, they are insanely friendly. So it was a good experience, even though circumstances.
Now, were you ever afraid of catching Ebola while you were there?
No, not even a little bit. This thing is really hard to catch. I mean, you know, there are some studies that say that hypothetically you could, in some alternate universe, potentially catch it from someone sneezing or touching you. But really the only way it's ever been documented to ever have been passed is if you touch someone's diarrhea or vomit, and that's really the only way to get it.
Yeah, I usually stay away from people's diarrhea and vomit, just as a rule of thumb for my own personal. If you hear me coughing at all tonight, know that I am a little bit under the weather. That may affect my voice, but I'm still here. That's all that matters. All right, well, let's get right into the show. We got a bunch of different topics to talk about tonight. The first thing I want to talk about, you know, this was big news at the beginning of the week. Of course, it's been since eclipsed by recent events going on with, Paris and whatnot. But, excuse me. This is still news, still relevant to our field, still a topic of discussion. So let's start with this, and then we'll finish with some Paris stuff. So the recent protests by, we'll say, social justice warriors at recent colleges recently have been garnering a lot of news, not just because of the protests or the message they were trying to get out about the issues related to the apparent, racism or lack of action on certain issues, but really the news they made for themselves by denying media to document and do their job after they had gotten the sort of response they wanted from the administration, which was resignation of, I believe, the president or the dean of the school. Chancellor. Okay. Yeah. So, they gotten that response they wanted, but then when media tried to document afterwards, they were essentially blocked. And there was a specific engagement between an Asian photojournalism student in the crowd that was, just went viral. So, have either of you had any kind of similar experiences? How did you handle it? What did you think of this situation?
I think Marcus and I both have had. I know firsthand we have. Marcus has the better story from Ferguson, but I'm not quite sure they were actually should be considered protesters more so than just people who like to set cars on fire. I think probably every photojournalist who's ever covered especially Occupy and kind of since then, we've all had problems with people who've tried to deny us taking photos, and it's ranged everything from, oh, just please don't take my photo, to aggressively, trying to take a camera or whatever. Our mutual friend of ours, C.S. Muncie, and I were covering Chicago, the NATO protests a couple years ago, and we had one guy who actually physically tried to pull CS's cameras off of his body, which luckily he always had them carabiner clipped onto him. Then try to pull him off and then bash him on the ground, and it took both CS and I physically assaulting him basically to prevent him from destroying the camera gear. And that was just because we were trying to document a girl had gotten hit by a police car, and the police car hit her pretty much on purpose. So it was something that we knew that we wanted to document because we knew that it was likely going to become a court case at some point, because she was actually hospitalized, pulled away, it was bad enough situation that she actually had an ambulance. But a lot of the occupiers and the medic crew were surrounding her and preventing us from taking photos. And they got really, really aggressive about it. And eventually we got whatever kind of photos we could and kind of moved on. But we were he was actually attacked after that by one of the guys that was yelling at us. And then my favorite part of it was that afterwards she went online asking for anyone who had documentation and photos of her getting hit by the car and afterwards. So her good buddies actually prevented her from potentially having a lawsuit and an actual case against the police department, who I believe actually pressed charges against her in their traditional sense that what they do. So it's I understand the Mizzou protesters' kind of need for a space that isn't going to have 10,000 cameras constantly pointing at them, but it's kind of, unfortunately, it ends up being an all or nothing thing. Either you get press or you don't get any. And my whole thing from that was that I think the response of the media should have been, okay, we're going to go cover something else, and literally just do a media blackout in response to that, and let them work it out on Twitter, I guess. But that's me. Marcus, what do you think?
Yeah, Zach knows that I've been through a lot with protesters being a little more than just unruly. So, after a couple types of those experiences, I'm a little more picky with what protests I choose to cover, and, more conservative with what I am and am not willing to do. For me, this is a story that was important enough to cover, and it's worth fighting for the access. But I found that, what the photog did, arguing with a crowd of people, it just doesn't work. Here's what I would have done. Make friends with an activist or two beforehand, someone in the camp that I can, stay with, and that'll prevent me from getting kicked out. Or, alternatively, if I'm on the outside, put my camera away in the bag and duck right under the line and make a beeline for their tent. And if I didn't have time to do that, I'd just stand back and shoot the other photogs and TV shooters having trouble with denial of access, because, the story was, like Zach said, originally about a racist chancellor and president resigning. But, the millisecond that professor called for some muscle to physically remove a reporter from the situation, the more interesting story became why the press was being censored. And I think, you can try and have a safe space, but you can't do it on public property. If you want a safe space, you can do it in a common room, or somewhere that's, has a key card, or a dorm room or something like that. But you can't have it on publicly accessible property. That's just not a legitimate desire.
Yeah, I listened to the Petapixel Podcast a few days ago, and they talked about this subject, and they also had the videographer who shot it give his thoughts. And it seems that from what happened, it all happened pretty quick, and the professor who called for muscle, she was a professor of media relations or media something, and she was fired, or she resigned, obviously due to the issues. And, there was a lot of interesting topics brought up about, was she inciting riot, inciting physical harm against, these other students? And had there been physical harm done, that could have been something that would have, she could have essentially been charged with. So it was pretty interesting kind of hearing how that went down, but, it went down pretty quick. And it seemed like, the photographer was, trying to document and was essentially walked into by the protesters. So I think it was two sets of students who both wanted to express their ideologies and what they thought was right at the same time, which created the conflict. But, I agree, probably a more seasoned photojournalist might have realized that they were wasting their time and tried to cover it from a different angle. Vice trying to convince people that they're wrong. I was in a situation a couple of years back where I tried to document some protesters. I was doing a story about protesters, specifically war protesters, and also war supporters. So this was, during the height of the Iraq War, and there were two groups. There were like the Eagles, War Eagles, and the anti-war protesters. And they would routinely protest on opposite sides of the street, against one another, counter-protest one another. Well, I was trying to do a story that kind of covered this whole topic from both sides. And what I learned was you shouldn't do that at the same time, because the war protesters, well, I would say the war protesters were initially cool with me having me around until they learned that I had a military association at the time. And then they were suspicious of me. And then they saw me photographing the other anti-war or the pro-war protesters, and then they just completely lost faith in me and had no trust in me for that. So for that reason, so I would try and document them, and they would just stonewall me and not give me the time of day. And I told them, you're going to affect your own story and make yourselves look bad, because ultimately I can only get what I can get. And if you don't give me what I need to tell your side of the story, it's going to be, in the end, your side of the story is going to look weaker than their side of the story, because they're letting me document them. So it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, because in the end, the only person I could get to document from their side was this woman who was really pretty off the wall, and not, I think, an accurate representation of all the peace protesters, but she was the only person who let me interview her and document her. So I think, that's what these protesters essentially got, was a self-fulfilling prophecy of, instead of us telling their story, now we're telling a story about them, and them being, unreasonable and just, anti-media to the point where, they're being portrayed as bullies.
Yeah, I could see that. I used to be, years ago, the AntiWar Movement is actually what turned me into a journalist. At least it's one of the things, is the kind of, I got tired of my activism not being portrayed in the media correctly, and not, or even not at all. When you march through the streets of Manhattan with 400, 500,000 people, and the media doesn't even pick it up at all as a nightly news story, then you get a little frustrated with the media, and I understand that. But it's come, you have to figure out how to work with them, and then, work with outlets that cover, like during Occupy, I remember a lot the reaction whenever Fox News, even the local affiliates, which are actually in New York, the local affiliates is probably actually worse than the national affiliate, because it's it literally was the nightly newscast was hosted by the chief of police's son. So it understandably had its issues, but they refused to talk to them, and then they did talk to them, made fun of them, and yelled at them, and tried to kick them out of the park. And so that became the story, as opposed to whatever kind of story that they would have put together, which would have portrayed, protesters in a bad light anyway, because it's Fox News. But I gotta point to Marcus. Marcus, you have to tell your Ferguson story about dealing with protesters. And this all stemmed from a story that we did kind of together, where we covered the
Oath Keepers.
The Oath Keepers, a famous militia. No, they're not a militia group. I'm sorry. The famous patriot group, I guess. That suddenly, shockingly appeared in 2008, and worried about our federal government's constitutional overreach. During the Bush administration. Never mind that. So, Marcus, you were there a year for the year anniversary, and we had actually been there during kind of the big violent times. And we had talked to a member of the Oath Keepers who were there, the Patriot Group, and they returned for a year anniversary, and you had a interesting run-in, not with the Oath Keepers, but with some of the protesters.
Yeah, at one point, one of the protesters decided that he was going to tweet out a photo of me talking to the Oath Keeper. And, I went over and I shook his hand and I said, "Hey, how you doing, Sam? It's been a long time. How's everything going?" And of course, the protesters took this as a sign that I was secretly an Oath Keeper, despite the fact that I had my press badge hanging around my neck, and two cameras on my side and a TV microphone with a microphone flag on it. So this guy tweets out the photo of me, and of course it gets like 200 retweets, and it gets featured on Crooks and Liars, or whatever that is. I don't know whether that's Zach. You got to tell me what that is. Lefty blog, warning everybody about me. So I know exactly who it is too. It's another guy named Marcus, and I tweet back at him, "Hey, what are you doing? I'm not independent, and this is someone that I've done a story on in the past." And of course, this is just basically painting a target on my back. And of course, it kind of ties into my experience earlier, where I was covering the looting, and of course, myself and my photographers, we got physically attacked. I had to yell for help for the guy to get off me. And the next time after that, a couple months later, I was back in Ferguson, and I got carjacked at gunpoint because I was doing a stand-up in a place where they didn't want me doing a stand-up. And activists don't like it when they see Fox News say and do stupid stuff. And it's not even Fox News, it's guests on Fox News that work for insane right-wing organizations that are just brought on as guests. And of course, when they do that, the rest of the media gets blamed because, we're all the same and we all do the exact same thing that Fox News does.
Well, that's one of the really big things I find frightening when the left. The left does it amazingly well too, and so does the right. When they talk about the media, they talk about as if I'm the same as I'm anything like Rachel Maddow, or I'm anything like Bill O'Reilly, or I'm anything like even Jeremy Scahill, for that matter. There's many different forms of media. Hell, you, Marcus, you work for Chinese TV. I work for usually I work for lefty blogs, and we usually actually work together. So it's just like the level of lumping us together. It's like how completely freaking ridiculous that is amazing, and that's why anytime like during Paris and Beirut. I don't know if this is a good segue or not, but during Paris and Beirut happening, there's about a dozen different stories about how the media didn't cover Beirut. The media isn't going to talk about this, but they'll talk about Paris. And it's like, never mind the fact that all you have to do is do a Google News search for Beirut, and you'll see the 8,500 stories that anyone from BBC to Mike The Guardian has done about Beirut. It's just how basically people on Facebook and Twitter have decided to perceive the media at the time. So yeah, it's kind of a pervasive element, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse and worse, and it puts a lot of our work in danger, and not necessarily even, for you, Marcus, it's been physical danger, but for a lot of it, it's, I have a hard time sometimes getting access. I have to work through other people who are who are activists who know me, or people I've worked with before, to get that next step of access. Because people on both sides don't trust that quote unquote the media, and that's fine and all, but if we get labeled as a undercover police officer or whatever, then that becomes really dangerous, because we also have to be able to tell both sides of the story, and we have to go talk to the oath keepers, and we have to be able to talk to the protesters, so that's one reason I'm not super happy about the way. I kind of wish I was born 30 years earlier for as working as a journalist. I think that Twitter and Facebook have a lot of benefits, but I'm not quite sure the drawbacks of them, and the kind of the quick turnaround response that we have is necessarily a positive thing. So,
yeah, it seems to be a systemic misunderstanding of.
You've got bad echo.
Say again?
You've got a really bad echo.
Okay.
Oh, it's fixed.
Okay.
You're a lot better now.
Okay, but now I'm recording. Test.
Yep.
Okay. And let's go again. 5, 4, 3, 2. What I understand about the issues related to what went down at the campus, it seems that it's a systemic misunderstanding of, what photojournalists are, what we do. Again, what you're talking about, the role of media. And it's what's most disappointing is that you have administrators and teachers who don't understand this either. Excuse me. And they're propagating misinformation. But let's move on to the next topic up for bids. When photographs become evidence. So this was a story put out by the Lens blog. It's a New York Times blog where they talk about different stories related to photojournalism. And there was a story about one of their photographers who was arrested for obstructing justice because they were documenting some stop and frisks activity. So the police officers essentially assaulted the reporter taking the photos. And essentially what prevented the reporter, or helped the reporter win or a photojournalist win his case, was the fact that he was constantly taking photos the entire time. And in his court case, they were able to point to things like metadata to basically disprove what the police were saying in terms of their reports, or in terms of any kind of obstruction of justice that he was possibly doing. And I think that, tied together with the video that was captured by the videographer, both kind of helped protect him. And I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on your photographs being used as evidence, or have your photographs have you have a jam?
The story though with Bob Stoller, I feel like it has to be noted. It's even more interesting in New York because in New York, the police department actually makes the decision-making process on who is a working, recognized journalist in New York. So
right, you have to go to them to get your press badge.
In the photos and in the video as well, and a separate video for the journalist who's working with him, that he's holding up his press card, or he's holding up something, and what he's holding up is his DCPI press card, which is what in the video, if you watch, the journalist is or the police officers are telling him, "Oh, you got to call DCPI," which is of course always the favorite thing. Is just call somebody else. You'll get your rights returned to you later on. Not when it's important, not when you need the photos, but later on you'll get some sort of understanding of it. I actually one of my big stories of getting having almost what should have had my photos used in a court case actually has to do with photographing the Cicely McMillan trial, and then photos of her getting thrown around by police. And she was arrested. She was actually arrested for supposedly assaulting a police officer. I actually witnessed her arrest. I have like a really dark photo of her getting on the ground when she was being arrested. But it never, neither side ever seemed to take any interest, even though I offered my photos to both sides, and they were already published on my website for months, actually. So they were available for either side to look at. And in fact, I actually was one of the first people to publish video of her after being arrested, getting actually picked up and thrown by actually her arresting officer, the person she supposedly assaulted so badly that he couldn't see or something like that, and is assaulting, getting hit in the eye, if I remember correctly. But it's interesting because it kind of ties into the activism side as well, like we were talking in the previous segment about how when I published these photos, and I did a piece for what is now reading the pictures, talking about how like taking step by step through the evening of what happened to her, where did she go, and taking all the photos that were available. We did kind of like a photo analysis, forensic breakdown of the evening, and I never heard anything from police, never heard anything from that end, but I did hear a lot from her supposed allies and protesters who actually went after me and yelled at me and screamed at me and tried to stop me from taking further photos when I was covering her protest for the Village Voice, a protest at one of her trials for the Village Voice, and that was kind of enlightening in the fact that I actually thought that my video, which shows her getting picked up and thrown 4 feet across the ground by a police officer, actually kind of documented quite well the sort of violence that the NYPD was committing against occupiers on a regular basis. But that, I guess, wasn't good enough for them, and the fact that I questioned the fact that her story that she said in court actually made no freaking sense whatsoever. So you can't win for trying, I guess. Sometimes you can't make everybody happy, but I'm happy to see with Bob Stoller, the New York Times photographer who was assaulted, is that he actually got it switched around enough that the police officer that assaulted him actually is hopefully looking at jail time for doing it, because he kept taking photos, and actually down to the fact that the XF data was used in court, which is kind of amazing, because the police officer claimed that he was taking flash photos, and because I guess flash photos are an assault tactic, I guess.
I was blinded.
He was going after the officer, continually taking flash photos, but the XF data proves that he was not actually taking flash photography. But he's an excellent photographer, and I'm happy that he's actually, because he wasn't able. This also prevented him from doing a lot of police-related work in the city for several months, because I believe they took away his press credentials, his New York City press credentials for a while. So, I mean, this is one of the huge problems with any time we get involved in a court case, is that both sides, whether it be police or whether it be protesters or whether it be the victim or whatever the wordage is, we potentially get mixed in and pulled into it. And that's why I think a lot of times it's better to just, pull back and not actually get involved in any way, shape, and form. I mean, except for Bob Stolar's case, he was kind of forcefully involved into it because it was him. But yeah, so Marcus, have you had any?
I'm with you, Zach. I de-escalate with cops no matter what, even when they're in the wrong. It's not worth risking arrest and being pulled out of work for off an assignment for like 6 hours while you're sitting in jail. I mean, chances are you will get your charges dropped because you are doing a constitutionally protected job. But the fact remains that if you're pulled off the street for an extended amount of time, you lost your chance at getting the photos that you need.
Yeah.
And what I would do generally is just bounce over to a different crime scene or ask them to put up tape and pretend to be as cooperative as possible, while still reminding them that if there's no tape up, I don't know where to stand.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that the problem is that, in the city, I mean, I completely understand what you're saying. In the city, though, in I don't know how Chicago PD are as bad. I mean, my experience with them were actually surprisingly good during the NATO protests, but NYPD have a tendency to continually make arbitrary lines of demarcation of where we're supposed to be, to the point
Chicago
where
PD is not bad.
You can see in the video in the New York Times article, which we'll have posted in the notes, that they actually, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll push you back to the complete end of the block, like to the point where you can't even get a photo with your telephoto lens if you try. So literally they prevent you from covering the story under some guise of, safety or whatever.
Crime scene protection, that's what they say.
Yeah, I mean, and they get to the point where they actually, they also block the photos, which is also a thing during Occupy. They lost continually in court cases in the saying that what they would do is if they were arresting somebody, they would have 6 or 7 officers surround the arresting, the scene where people are being arrested and just stand there and block photos. That's why if anyone looks through photos of Occupy Wall Street, 90% of the arrested, when the occupiers or protesters are on the ground, 90% of them are being shot through legs of police officers, which I know that's how all my photos are like. I barely have any clear photos of people getting arrested in like 6 months worth of protests because they decided that this is what they were going to do. Never mind the fact it goes against several court cases, but they're the NYPD. They do what they want to do. And that's kind of the story of that's how it works now. But I'm actually surprised, genuinely surprised, that I have not actually been contacted more about photo usage in court cases. Not that I'm necessarily disappointed in it, but I'm surprised that are photos not being used? Are they being used anyway? And I'm just not being, journalists or photographers aren't being contacted. But to me, I remember when I got arrested during Occupy, I tried to contact everybody I could about getting photos of me working beforehand to prove that because I had to prove to the NYPD that I was a working photojournalist in the city because I haven't gotten New York City press credentials. So I ended up having to go back and forth in New York City and do court cases for 6 months while my case was being argued. And I eventually, the assistant DA said in open court that I was a professional working photographer in the city of New York, which is fun. But that was never even a thing that they bothered to look at. Like I had to provide a whole bunch of photos and stories that I'd done, but as far as I can tell, they never even looked at it. So it's interesting that photo evidence isn't even used in court as much as one would think it would be. So.
Yeah, the only time I've ever had my photos used in court was during a DUI crash that I covered back when I was working local news. and there was some celebrity lady that was on some soap opera, and she had gotten in a DUI crash and allegedly killed 2 people. And of course, one of the arguments that her defense lawyers made is it wasn't her fault because the person that she crashed with wasn't wearing his glasses. And one of the photos that I had was of him wearing his glasses.
Oh.
And that ended up being used as evidence. But I think what you're saying is right. It really the only time photos are used in court is when somebody has enough money to get a team of lawyers to go over and do a manual search through photographers, contact a bunch of different photographers and say, hey, listen, what do you have?
Here's a question for both of you. If you were contacted, would you discuss, would you go into court and talk? And do you see an ethical issue there?
I see no ethical issue at all. I see no issue as long as I'm not betraying a source that I've promised to keep anonymous. I'll talk about what I've seen. I'm talking about what I've seen now.
Yeah.
I think there'd be more ethical.
Dave?
Dave, you're still muted.
I think there'd be more ethical problems with the issue.
You're still muted, Dave.
You can't hear me? You can't hear me? How about now? Can you hear me? You can't.
He's working on it. No, not.
Let me see. I don't know what the issue is. I can hear you. You can't hear me. I can't hear. Here we go. Now can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we got you. So yeah, what do you think? Would you use your if you were contacted by a lawyer on either side? Would you feel okay testifying in court about like the story around your photos?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't have any qualms against it. In fact, I'd be probably morally or ethically against not going to court, unless they were trying to get me to fabricate some story that didn't exist, based on the photos. Like, I don't know, they were trying to use me as an eyewitness, or if they were trying to get me to, the prosecution or the defense was trying to get me to mold their story based on the photos I took. But I mean, I can't think of, I've seen a few of those lawyer shows, but I can never think of them bringing the photographer on to testify. It always seems like, okay, there's photo evidence, and unless they need, more information, or they judge the legitimacy of the photo, they might bring in a photo forensic analyst, but the photographer themselves, I don't know. I can't think of very many cases off the top of my head that's ever happened during. But then again, maybe it happens more often than we think, and we just don't know.
How much of your because it was interesting during the Cicely McMillan thing. I seem to be one of the only people, like the Village Voice did a large story, a cover story about it that used a bunch of my photos, and same thing with the reading the pictures story. I ended up being able to tell a story that no one else did, especially in the lefty progressive media, because I had I actually kept. I'm a digital hoarder, and I keep all of my archives. I keep every single photo, even if it's completely unusable. And do you guys? Because that was one of the reasons the photos, we were able to tell that story on reading the pictures, was because I kept all the photos around it, even if they weren't really. I would never have sent them to my wire service or anything like that. do you guys keep your archive like that wide? And like, could it be, like just, I kind of keep it now. I keep everything specifically since that story because now I know that, any of my photos could be used to tell a wider story. Something that, 2 years from now I wouldn't have known that this person was sitting, standing in the background or was going to become a huge part of the story.
Yeah, I keep every single photograph I take.
Cool. I've been yelled at by CS actually. CS is like, why do you keep everything? Because he barely keeps anything as far as I can tell.
Really?
Which is actually one reason I got the Village Voice story and he didn't. It's just amusing. But
you never know what something you shot, might be something you want later.
Yeah.
Might be something useful later. Might be, a good photograph that you just overlooked on first pass, but now you're going through and you're trying to build your portfolio or something like that. You're scanning your photos again, and now that photograph has some specific worth or meaning.
Yeah, I keep everything, and I've even stopped buying external hard drives. What I've done is I just bought a sled, and I just bought like 1 million internal hard drives, and I'll just pop the internal hard drive on the sled because it's not going anywhere. I'll use an external hard drive for stuff when I'm on the road because obviously you don't want those internal hard drives to go on the road with you, bounce around, get damaged. You want something hardy for the road, but at home I keep them in a box.
Yeah, I need to start doing that.
So when you say sled, you mean one of those devices you pop the hard drive into?
Yeah, exactly.
And you're not worried about dust and contamination being, affecting that hard drive?
No, not even a little bit. Internal hard drives are really hardy. They're designed to go into super, super dusty computers that don't get cleaned out for like 10 years at a time. The way they're engineered is they have a minimum number of working parts to break down because that's the one thing you really don't want to break down. And of course they do break down, but it's always due to a drop. It's never due to dust or dirt or something like that.
Right, the actual read head breaking or something.
Exactly.
What's your secondary backup solution? Like, what's your offsite backup?
So what I'll do is I'll back up every single photo I've ever taken on those internal hard drives. My offsite backup is really only the stuff that I cannot possibly live without. It's like photos that I would die if I lost, or I would die if my wire service somehow accidentally lost them. And that's I just pop it on Google Drive. I have the $1 a month Google Drive thing, and it lets me store a bunch of photos.
I'm using an online backup storage solution, Crash Plan. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it essentially allows you to store unlimited data. So I've actually backed up everything.
What's it called?
Crash Plan. I've got a desktop computer that I don't really use anymore, and I have that hardwired to the internet. And so it spent, I'd say, probably about 6 months just constantly backing up data. So I've got it all backed up, and the only time it's not backed up is when I add more photos to it, and that continues to back it up. So that's my offline storage solution because I don't really have a local secondary storage solution. But I also have Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, OneDrive, all those other services. Zach, what's your backup solution?
I for my final edits, I do really wide final edits kind of after I send all my stuff to the wire, and then I'll go back once I get home, then I'll do a wider edit, and then I upload them to my portfolio site through Zenfolio, which it's like $130 a year and it's unlimited. And they actually have started allowing for raw backups as well, which is super nice. And so I can just upload. I upload 810 megapixel, 810 megabytes photos, so that stuff can be printed pretty well. I mean, eight megabytes is more than anyone's ever going to ask for news media stuff, and it'll usually do a 11 by 14 pretty well. If somebody really wanted a print of something bigger than that, then I'll go into my other backups for that. But after having just 2 hard drives die, I'm not kidding, last week at one time, it was I'm starting. Actually, this is what basically I'm devoting this entire week to doing, is making sure that everything that possibly could be backed up is backed up, at least in the virtual world, before I even start buying more hard drives, which seem to fail continually anyway. So,
yeah, I mean, that's the worst feeling in the world when you lose a hard drive that has all your data on it. And that's what I like about the crash plan, because it's off-site. I was also using Flickr for a short while as a backup solution, because they were offering a terabyte of data for free. So that was what I was working on. But Crash Plan seems to be working for now. And I've got it's so inexpensive to buy hard drives. I mean, I was looking online the other day and get like a 8 terabyte hard drive for like a few $100, $150, something like that. So if I ever need to back up my entire archive, I could just back it up on one of those and put that in my safety deposit box or something. What kills me, though, is that I shoot a lot more video than I used to do. And so that's just exponentially increased my demand for storage. So I'm working through that. Anyways, let's go on to our next topic. The Paris attacks have been the big news du jour. That's my pun. Too soon? Okay. That's the news du jour. In terms of just what's going on, and besides being just an awful, awful thing that happened, from a photojournalism standpoint, to what do you think about this situation? So, I mean, it's a sensitive time. You're a photojournalist on the ground in Paris. You're trying to document the aftermath of this horrific attack. Obviously, we as photojournalists have to be objective as observers and just document and hide behind our camera to ensure we're getting showcasing the stuff. But you're probably going to be documenting some potentially graphic, potentially heartbreaking imagery, people crying and breaking down and stuff like that. How do you as a photojournalist approach those topics? How do you kind of disconnect yourself? And when you're making those selects, how do you choose to be like, okay, I'm gonna choose that photograph of the mother breaking down because her son has died or something like that?
Let me go for a sec. I've done a lot of these. I think the only one that's ever really hit me hard, I mean, of course they all hit you hard in one way or another. The only one that's ever really hit me that hard was Sandy Hook Elementary School. I got there about an hour after it happened, just because I was up north anyway. And I saw it on my ringer, and I was like, oh, okay, wow, I got to get up there. And kind of what I did there is I shot the photos that weren't obvious to shoot. I mean, obviously, getting someone breaking down is a really powerful image, but sometimes shooting the person who is crying but isn't fully broken down, the person that's crying but still stoic, still is keeping a straight face, sometimes that's the more powerful image. And those are generally the ones that I picked out. And those are the ones that I would pick out if I was in Paris. I mean, I'm probably going to head over to Greece or Turkey in January to cover the refugees. And now that this attack happened, I think that as photojournalists we should be focused more on the things that aren't obvious, because people they all have their cell phones and they're all taking photos of this really easily accessible stuff. I think our job as photojournalists is to get access to the stuff that's not as easily accessible and shoot that. Otherwise, what's the difference between us and Sally Doe with her smartphone camera?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done a lot of that sort of scene. I mean, there's a lot of well, I guess I remember the closest thing I can think of was at the Michael Brown Memorial, and a mother of another victim of police shooting showed up, and I'm continually surprised. I guess I tend to shoot those things with as kind of trying to not be in a situation where potentially the person crying or the person that I'm photographing could even slightly react to me. So I usually shoot with a telephoto far away, and I'm always surprised when I see photographers run up with a wide angle portrait lens or whatever and shoot as close as possible, which ends up usually the person crying or reacting, it ends up reacting to. And so I saw that. I actually saw that I was in New York shooting, photographing a vigil, an impromptu vigil that had set up. And there's a handful of people, I'm guessing probably French students, that were really, really hit hard by it. They were holding candles. It were great. It was, understandably really excellent photos. And I was shooting with a telephoto, like usually through a crowd, through the small crowd that was there, trying to get, more of a natural moment. And at least one of the photographers that was there, I don't know who he was shooting for, but walked right across the memorial. It was just a chalk drawing with candles on it. Walked right across the memorial, stood 2 feet away from him, and was shooting with a portrait lens and a flash. And I was just kind of stunned by that, to the point where the guy that broke out of his moment that he was holding the candle and kind of looking down and just finally waved off the photographer, who kept taking photos throughout that. And this guy I know is a professional photographer. I forget which newspaper he shoots for, but it's interesting the varying techniques of photographers and grabbing scenes like this. Because I mean, like Marcus, I've seen you shoot scenes like this, whether it be in Ferguson or other places, and I don't think you've done that. I've also seen your work from tornado disaster scenes where people have lost everything, and even as a stand-up video crew with a light and everything like that. That's not something that's really natural. And I think it kind of goes back to a lot of things. Like, these are the scenes when we have moments of really having the most effect on people, really entering people's lives at moments where it's really, really, it's the worst moment in their life. And this is our moment when we can decide on how, quote unquote, the media is portrayed. And I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on kind of like how these moments are, kind of our defining moments as well, on how we get portrayed in the media as well, and how people look at us?
Well, I've always been cognizant of my position whenever I've had the opportunity to photograph, either grief, sorrow, or a traumatic event. Of course, shoot that, as long as you can, like as far away as you can. I've shot some funerals at Arlington National Cemetery, and, I'm always thinking of composition, but I've got that long distance lens on, and if I've got a wide angle on, it's because I'm trying to get a shot of the entire scene. So the fact that someone would have the kind of audacity to get up close and personal during that type of scene either shows a lack of empathy or respect for the people, or I don't know. I mean, from a visual standpoint, maybe he's trying to get something different visually, but it's not worth damaging the reputation of photojournalists in general, or trying to get some shot. You got to give people their moment. I have seen some excellent wide angle shots of grief and sorrow as well. I mean, I can think of some news photographs from different bombings and disasters in the Middle East and whatnot, where you see the the father carrying their dead child through the streets, surrounded by a crowd of people. But obviously that's a different type of event. But yeah, I've seen those type of photographs where the photographer was just wide and up close and got some really dynamic imagery that way. But again, it all has to be balanced. It all has to be based on the situation. But the last thing I want to do is discredit photojournalists, visual journalists in general, by making myself look bad and then giving a bad reputation to anyone else I work with. I did a little bit of, we'll say, street photography when I was a freelancer in New York City. And, sometimes we'll call them subjects, were walking across the street, or, you have the opportunity to photograph the subject from a distance or up close. And there's a lot of other photographers who are also trying to capture the subject at the same time. So sometimes they'll get up closer to get a photograph, disregarding other photographers. But that's not really an image of the media. It's just kind of how the dog-eat-dog world of celebrity photography works sometimes. But I'm always cognizant of where I am in a situation like that.
Marcus?
I'll do it if I have to. I will. It is a very rare day when I will get up in a grieving person's face. It is a very, very, very rare day, and there has to be a really good reason for it. The only one I can think of in recent memory is when I was shooting a sort of long-form story as a videographer out in Chicago when I was prepping that crime pitch for Vice. You remember that story, Zach?
Yeah.
The one that you helped edit. And I did get up real close to that to a lady who was grieving about her son because she called me over. And I think that's really the only time in recent memory that I've gotten up close and personal with someone who's grieving. I mean, I think you have to kind of weigh the advantages of telling the story dramatically and truthfully versus respecting someone's privacy. But I just don't see the reason, a technical reason for getting up close to someone, even if you do have a wide lens.
Yeah, there has to be a real strong reason to do that.
Yeah.
All right. We'll finish on a topic that's a little bit lighter. I have never experienced this myself. Maybe you guys have, but a lot of celebrities, a lot of rock stars are, requesting or having anyone who photographs for them, sign these draconian contracts that essentially give them full rights to your imagery. I think this is kind of essy and really is a kind of a poor direction we've gone, and especially these artists are really disrespecting other artists, us, in their request of these rights. Have either of you had an experience shooting concerts and had to sign these contracts? Did you sign the contract? Did you not? And just overall, what do you think of this stuff?
I don't shoot concerts. I'm the wrong person to ask. But if I was asked to shoot one of these concerts and I had to sign a contract, I'm just not going to do it. I'll call the assignment desk and tell them, listen, they're asking me to do this. This is not in line with our paper's editorial policy or Wire's editorial policy or TV editorial policy. What do you want me to do? And then they'd probably make a phone call to the PR people and get that thing dealt with. I mean, I know the New York Times shot a Taylor Swift concert at one point, and there was an issue with the release, and they ended up not having to sign the release because they just called a PR person and said, listen, if you want this story to be published, we're not signing the damn release.
Right.
This is one of the, because Taylor Swift was kind of the prime example. She had a beyond a ridiculous one, where the point where she claimed in the contract that she could take away and destroy any media. So she could either, I think some people reported it as taking the photographer's cameras from them, which my understanding would just be physically taking like memory cards and deleting them.
Yeah, good luck with that one.
I contractually can't speak. I've had about that, but I've had experience with that shooting a concert once. But that was for a private situation, and it wasn't for a news. It was under a news gathering thing. But the times that one of the problems is if the New York Times and the big publications don't really take a stand against this. The smaller local papers and especially freelancers don't have a shot in hell. So what worries me is when you have a lot of these larger media conglomerates who kind of work together and make deals where, Taylor Swift can use these photos for her on her Instagram page and other places and in marketing materials and calendars and stuff like that. And that was what she was asking. She had the right to use any of the photos in calendars, which is, a lot of how she makes money is the extra, the t-shirts and kind of all the other stuff. And the photographer wouldn't see a single penny of that even if it was some sort of financial sharing deal, it'd be nice. It'd be a nice conversation that could be had. But, so, a couple papers took up, there was one paper, I forget where it was. I'll have to search for the story and we'll post the link. But actually sent a cartoonist to one of the concerts. I believe they just paid for a ticket and had the cartoonist do the quote unquote photography from the concert to portray for visual imagery, which I think is a nice statement because I'm guessing that that's not what she wanted. And that's not what she can use for her own financial purposes. What's dangerous though, there was one paper which the internet kind of loved, a paper that actually just called on their readers to send in photos that they took with their cell phones and everything out and their own cameras, and which is kind of a terrifying move if you're a professional photographer working anywhere, because you can get, if you know how to shoot, you know how to take a photo, you can take a pretty decent photo at a lot of these concerts with an iPhone. Luckily most people don't know how to do that. Well, if you're taking a wide shot or something like that,
wide shot.
Yeah, you're taking a nice wide shot, but half the time, they run two photos from a concert, and they run a close up of Taylor Swift, which most of the time, Taylor Swift's people will provide to the media as a press photo, and then they run a wide shot of how many, the auditorium or whatever that they were in, because the local papers, want to portray that it was at the Syracuse War Memorial or as opposed to somewhere else. So it's a dangerous slope. But the biggest thing is, it's interesting is how, at the same time, again, with Taylor Swift, that she was in a big fight with, I think it was iTunes, about, percentage sales and how they were portraying her on their media service. So it was an interesting, what's that? Oh, Spotify. Yeah, Spotify. And so it's interesting how a lot of these artists don't see the difference between the two. But that's always been a problem with artists not respecting other artists' work. It goes down to the famous, like we talked about in the last episode, I believe the Obama AP Obama photo that Shepard Fairey stole to make his Hope poster. And that he couldn't even be bothered to give, credit to the photographer and then deny that it was. So, it's kind of an old story, but now that we're actually getting, legal documents involved, it's kind of dangerous. So,
yeah, I think, if I were approached with that situation, I'd hopefully be strong enough to say, no, I'm not going to photograph under these circumstances. But if I didn't work for an entity like the New York Times, I don't know how much sway I'd have at the PR desk. Of course, it would depend on whatever entity would send me there. Their ability to sway essentially the PR desk. They could just essentially say, okay, fine, no thank you. I believe there was a story in a foreign country, I can't remember where, but I think they did drawings. I think you mentioned that they did drawings to interpret the concert, and they also just photographed from outside the concert. So they did what they did to get coverage. But yeah, I think they're unfair, and we should all boycott them. All right, so let's finish up with our photojournalism pick of the week. We'll go around the room, and basically you just kind of promote some sort of photojournalism that was produced during the week, whether it's your own or someone you respect, or just something related to the world of photojournalism that might be interesting for our listeners. Start with you, Zach.
I've got some of the other photos I got 2 photos in the Guardian this week from Vigil, but some of the other photos in which we'll post a link from the slideshow from around the world, and how people were memorializing and in other ways for the victims of the Paris and Beirut attacks. They were really, really stunning, and kind of in the quiet way, and a lot of them were even more different than kind of the standard candle, in the face sort of thing, candle lighting up the face memorial photo that everybody takes. And there wasn't really a particular one in that series, but every photo was really, really stunning.
Great, thank you. Marcus?
I was a big fan of the Boston Globe's roundup of Paris attack photos, bostonglobe.com/big picture. None of these are my photos, but I was very impressed by the mix of mourning photos versus action photos, and the actual selection of the photos themselves.
Cool. I'm going to pull my selection from theweek.com. They do a great roundup of kind of the week's most interesting photojournalism. And there was one particular shot that I thought was pretty neat, where a Hasidic Jew is doing a selfie group photo with a selfie stick in front of like a huge group of other Hasidic Jews. And, the Jews, the Hasidic, even the Orthodox ones, they aren't like the Amish. They aren't technology averse. So, they've got cell phones. I mean, B&H Photo is run by a huge organization of Jews. And they sell the best technology in the world for photojournalism, photography, and videography. But it's just the idea of, all these people in this sort of iconic religious garb for their religion. I mean, it's the same idea when you see nuns playing basketball or something like that. It's sort of the two different ideas of who these people are, contrasting one another, sort of the modern and the ancient sort of in the same frame. And plus it's a neat photograph. So that was my favorite shot that was produced this week. And, try not to be too Paris heavy, I guess. But that is it for the show. This has been Around the Lens, a weekly photojournalism roundtable podcast where 3, 4, or 5 photojournalists get to talk with each other about what's going on. And before we sign out, let's go around the room and everybody throw out whatever you want people to find out about yourself. Twitter handles, Facebooks, websites, whatever. Let's start with our guest panelist.
Facebook.com/Marcus DiPaola. I post photos and all kinds of nonsense on there.
Cool. Was that your personal page, or is that like a photography page?
It's
Like
a
business page.
It's kind of a mix of both. What I do is I do the blue check mark thing, and I'll just change my privacy settings so that everybody can see the cool stuff, and hopefully they're not able to friend me and see all my personal stuff.
Okay. All right. Zach, I know everything with you is ZD Roberts, right?
ZDRoberts.com, at ZD Roberts for Twitter, ZD Roberts on Facebook, and ZD Roberts kind of anywhere else. If you see that handle, it's probably me.
Good. That's good SEO. You own ZD Roberts.
I do.
I'm the same way with DJM Photo. I've tried to brand that for the last 15 years or so. So everything you can find on the web that's related to DJM Photos should be related to me. Although I have seen some other DJM photos rolling around more recently, but I've got a lockdown on all the major ones though. All right. Well, that concludes our show this week. I apologize for any technical difficulties that I don't edit out of this on accident, or all the coughs, sneezes, and everything else you may have heard during the show. We're a sick group this week, but we're having fun. So again, thank you, Zach. Thank you, Marcus, for your time today. I'm David J. Murphy, and we're out.